One
Uh,
time.
yeah, it makes sense. Okay, I
Let's
guess
go.
we should start. Yeah.
Yeah.
So today we wanted to approach the episode slightly differently and look at a particular historical event, and then see how that helps us understand the Nigerian situation, which we've been thinking about through this framework of the scam. And the event in question is known as the Cement Armada Scandal, which is actually a series of scandals that took place in the 1970s that appears to us to be one of the foundational scams of the current Nigerian political and economic arrangement.
Gowon's reconstructive efforts coincided with an unprecedented hike in oil prices, which brought an influx of revenue to the federal government beyond the country's wildest dreams. Nigeria's earnings from crude oil exports increased by over 500%. Nigeria also became strategically important during the Arab oil embargo on the United States, as it did not join and became the second largest supplier of petroleum to the United States. Although the oil boom increased the spending power of the federal government, it ultimately caused more of a problem than it solved. The massive funds generated by the oil boom encouraged the FMG to embark on a series of unprecedented and grandeur development construction of new army barracks and office complexes. The FMG imported several million tons of cement from abroad for the execution of these projects. This extravagant spending meant that at one point, 20 million tons of cement, which was half of the world's cement orders, were headed for Nigeria. The total amount was 10 times the total amount that the Lagos port could handle in a year, even if they had no other cargo to unload. This caused a massive backlog at the Lagos port, with over 400 ships battling for dock space as they waited to offload in what was termed the Cement Armada. Some of the cement either sank or was rendered unusable by the time it could be unloaded. An inquiry later revealed that both quantity and cost of the cement had been massively inflated in a scam aimed at squeezing as much money as possible out of the nouveau rich FMG.
So it seemed like a really appropriate conversation to have in this context.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk through the event and then zoom out and talk a little bit about its long-term implications and legacies. But before we do that, I thought we'd start with a kind of opening question, which is, I would direct to you guys. What struck you the most about this incident, and why do you think it's important to consider? Something that happened in the 70s. What's striking about it, and what's its kind of, why did you folks feel so strongly that it's something that we should discuss here?
Zemeka wanna
You go first.
Okay. When we look at the so-called inefficiencies, policy mistakes, that's in quotes, all these things in quotes, policy mistakes, stupid mistake, what they should have done and didn't do, and all these kind of things. If we were naive and didn't know how capitalism works or how the elites go about primitive accumulation, even at the expense of the people, it will seem like, they are doing something that is crazy, But if you understand that underdevelopment, if your elites are going to make more money through underdeveloping the nation, that's exactly what they will do. If they're going to make more money through preserving modes and means of production that are antiquated, that's what they will do. So if you have the Nigerian state through its elites and the military guys importing cement, in volumes that weren't necessary in the first place, and, the logistics to go about it seemed like a total flop, you have to look at the background as to the kind of money that was made and the flow of that money home and abroad, and how those type of events have duplicated or even triplicated or whatever, quadruplicated themselves through the Nigerian history, maybe it's in terms of contracts with power, be in terms of contracts for road, being in terms of contracts for building stuff and all that, the trains, when you look through it, you see the same principle of underdevelopment and primitive accumulation at the expense of the people, So these are the, will I say, theoretical or structural operation or modus operandi of the elites that you see that's been constant since the early inceptions of what we call Nigeria. So these are the things that this is a structural analysis of what we have with the Cement Armada. And be it military, be it the so-called democratic, this thing, you see that the mode of operation remains constant across board, So this is like what I've been able to pull out from that interaction, with the paper and the events that happened with this Cement Armada thing, So that's it for me, at least structurally.
Me, I don't know. I'm caught. I'm a bit caught in two minds. I mean, there's a part of me that would want to use this as a springboard for asking or searching for answers, about questions that has to do with the head of state at the time. Go on, because maybe aside Obasanjo, even maybe more than Obasanjo, if there's one military head of state ruler, maybe Obasanjo, the guy who Obasanjo took over from Muritala. The only other head of state who always been accorded some larger than life, who is almost cast as infallible in terms of him not being corrupt, or the argument has always been that maybe people around him were corrupt and he wasn't corrupt as such, was Gowon, and this whole Cement Armada scandal or fraud, depending on how, I think that it's more of a scandal than a fraud, even though it has bits of
fraudulent
fraudulent activities
components
within it, but but I think my stronger impulse will be to go with it being a scandal, so for me it's
I mean, okay, maybe you can explain the differences between those concepts later on, but anyway, no, I mean, not to interrupt you, but
because I mean, for me I mean, if you read the literature around it, you find that, what they say is that this put, Nigeria in the spotlight, but that Nigeria, I mean, corruption wasn't something this wasn't the first instance of it, I mean, the corruption stories around marketing boards, which predates this scandal of the 70s, so we're talking about from the 60s, and I'm saying in independent Nigeria, I'm not even saying from before that, so I take that marketing board, corruption and how peasant farmers were being shortchanged, way before I come to this. But in coming to this, I think that because of the scope of the scandal itself, the involvement of all parties, international shipping companies,
military contractors,
the scope, the magnitude of it, and the effect of it, and just seeing 400, 500 ships, across the coast in Lagos,
just waiting,
just waiting for years to offload. I mean, I think that's embarrassing, which is why it's the embarrassment bit that I tend to think about when I think of it in terms of a scandal more than and that so somebody fucked up. People were trying to remedy somebody's fuck up, but ended up,
compounding the fuck up.
Compounding the problem. So it's. I mean, I think that there's a bit more nuance to it than just saying. Even though there's a very strong impulse, on my own end to go with. This is how you find that Gowon was corrupt. And I think if you chase that down, there's something there to find. But I think that if you don't do it with a bit of measure, you then tend to miss the fact that even by design, the administrative controls that were in place were already deficient and couldn't handle the scale of what Nigeria was trying to achieve at the time. I mean, the intent wasn't so much that it was a bad one. It wasn't a bad intent. It's just that the execution was terrible, coupled with, corrupt practices by certain individuals.
Well, you said you were of two minds, and then you've spoken kind of about the significance of understanding like Gawan's possible corruption or not. But is there a second? What's the second mind, or did I miss it?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I wasn't as clear as I could have been. So my first mind is to say that Gawan was corrupt and chase it from there. Right.
Okay.
My second mind is to factor in the inadequacies within administrative control. One that inherited from the pre-colonial state, and how this was the first test of it. And within an independent nation was the first time we were seeing that people had policies weren't planned rightly. Issues of pricing did exist within this scandal. For instance, the Ministry of Defense had fixed the cement price for $60 at a time when the market price was way less. Well, not way less than that, but in the 54 region, which meant that people who also got contracts, could resell them at 4%.
No, of course, we'll come back, of course, to like the specificities of that question. Yeah. Okay, sorry, to interrupt, but that makes sense in terms of the wider significance. I buy what you both have said. OAG is pointing to the kind of enduring structure, that pits kind of ruling classes against the interest of the broad populace. And, Emeka's talking about the role of individuals, but also of like administrative systems. And there might be a slight tension in you guys' points actually, but maybe this will come out more clear as we go through the discussion. I will just chip one additional factor in as to why, to me, this seems like a very important thing to reconsider. And it's that, in a way, this scandal, Emeka was alluding to this as well, sets the tone for a lot of later scams to come. Both scams in the fraudulent sense, as in it created a template for frauds that have been then reutilized later on, but also scams in the legal sense, as in, or scams in the more profound sense in which we refer to it here, which is like kinds of market practices, state and market collusions that are not strictly speaking illegal, perhaps, but fundamentally detrimental to any kind of serious social transformation. So I think this incident really set the tone in some ways for a lot of what came after it, in terms of how the government conducts itself in the local and international market. And I hope that as we have the conversation, this comes out more clearly, but I just wanted to set, give us an opportunity to kind of contextualize why we thought this was an important event to consider before getting into things properly.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Cool.
To broaden it up and then let people understand how events played out and what might be the likely, structures and other factors that might have led to things like that. And then, of course, why they keep reoccurring in the Nigerian context,
Yeah, indeed. So let's get into the actual event itself. But to do so, I think it would be good to lay a bit of historical context. So some people who have studied this event want to trace the context all the way back to the colonial period. And they want to talk about how the colonial state was underfunded. And so the salaries of colonial officials were not enough to meet their needs. And so, there was this tendency that developed of state officials to dip their hands in the till, and that's the kind of origin of the sort of practices where state officials do this kind of thing that we see re-emerge in the Armada Scandal. So that's one set of perspectives about it, tying it to the colonial period. But another perspective on it ties it more so to the end of the Nigerian Biafran War and the fact that after the devastation of the war, the Nigerian government, and well, not only the end of the war, but also the emergence of the oil boom. In the context of both devastation and now having an influx of dollars, the Nigerian government thought to itself, why don't we rebuild? But then, particularly given that it was a military government, the focus at this time was to build out new barracks for the 200,000 or so soldiers that had fought in the war and now needed to be demobilized along with their families into various parts of the country. So for you guys, I mean, which of these contexts do you think is most important to highlight when we try to understand the background to why this scandal emerged? Or do you think they're both important? I mean, I just wonder how you would weigh, the longer running history going back to colonial times against the immediate context of the end of Biafran War and the oil boom.
I think they're both very important to consider. However, I wouldn't say that it's because they're underpaid that they have the tendency to, dip their hands into the state coffers and all that. If it's integral about the system that you're running, to always make a cut or make a killing, that's on an antagonistic framework against the people, like you always devise new ways to do that. And like Emeka said before, even before we had this whole arrangement, the marketing boards, if you have an antagonistic relationship, you always devise new means or new ways to steal from the people, and a country that was totally devastated and all, if you had a program, a widespread program to build for the people and all that, develop industries and shit, like we will have seen a better way and judicious way of spending that money. But it was about, okay, the military was in power, let's do these deals and all, like this is what you end up having. And that's it. So it's important to look, the colonial context comes with its own, problems when you don't decolonize properly and you have a bunch of people that take power, that see themselves as different from the masses of the people. And then, the other perspective, and this is what you have when you have that mixture, it's always parasitic towards the people, and you see with other contracts and other things that the Nigerian state engages into, like it's always against the people, really, So that's what I feel, and that's what I see. It's always been against the people, against the common farmers on the marketing boards, against the people when you take and steal from the coffers, against the, even against local industries and all, So that's how I see it as. We can't ignore, any part.
Okay. Yeah, Emeka, how might you see it? Or would you also locate it in a kind of wider structural condition rather than either of these two contexts?
You don't say OAG the vex, but
That's true.
I never vex with OAG. So I think I'd agree with OAG to start with. I'd agree with OAG that they're both important. The pre-colonial history, which is one that the independent Nigerian state inherited.
Colonial.
Sorry, the colonial, sorry. Yeah.
I mean, unless you want to go back to Sokoto Caliphate and
no. Colonial.
Or your empire.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The colonial, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about so I think that's important. But I think that if you're going to weight it, it's probably not as important as the events, that led to this scandal itself, because I think it was Larkin Smith, the guy I was looking for, the white guy, who, when there was finally a commission of inquiry that was set up, was accused of sabotage and sabotaging the Nigerian economy, actually. Right? But as these things happen, he always had willing accomplices within the Nigerian elites, especially in the military, So it's hard to say that I mean, what OAG tries to describe is what we met, we years after, but basically, I think what the argument is, what it seems to me more like, is that this set the tone for what then became commonplace, in within, in issuing contracts within Nigeria. I think that there's a lot that the Nigerian elite learned from this event, such that they had then began to replicate it and even fine tune it.
That's the word.
But at its most basic, this seemed to me like knowing the British, an act of economic sabotage, right? Just at a time when oil was booming in Nigeria, and that Nigeria would have made big leaps in terms of investments in infrastructure. I am not saying infrastructure the way Gowon thought about it in terms of just military barracks. I'm talking about public goods, that would have enhanced or facilitated trade and all whatnot. And that Nigeria missed that opportunity at a time when oil was selling for almost 3 times the price. But this was, if it was a mistake, it was one of the biggest cock-ups that Nigeria has ever seen. I think even now, and if it repeats itself, it is crazy. I think that I don't even know that there's anything that has beat it. And we've had scandals in this country, rats don't choke money, all those.
Snake don't
swallow money. So it's just the magnitude of what these guys, but it's hard to see that or say that it was organized. So I just think that it was like something that had the domino effect. Something led to something leading to something. Because sorry, but I'll try and wrap it up now. But what I'm trying to get at is the fact that from ordering for something you didn't need, there's no way you could have used it, to incurring demurrages, the ripple effect of all of that is just crazy. But just to give the excuse that Smith gives, he says that the prices for these things were fixed.
Well, you were talking about the context. We've not really come to.
Okay. For me, that's context for me, really. Within this context that I'm still trying to work around the part where there were cock-ups, right? I think that it's probably more useful to scrutinize that as opposed to, if we weight it, as opposed to trying to focus on what we inherited from the colonial government. I think that it's more useful in present day Nigeria to think about these mistakes, how they have then been, because I think that what was initially an honest mistake turned out to be something that became weaponized by the Nigerian elite, going forward within the military class and civil servants, top high-ranking civil servants within civil service, and much later politicians. Which is why those who know today will tell you that politicians can't really do much in terms of stealing if they didn't have accomplices within the civil service. So that's part of how you begin to see where this plays out. Yeah, so I'd leave it there. I don't know.
No, I buy that. I think two of you have said that both the longer running context and the immediate post-war situation are important to understanding what then happens. And I think I agree with that, but I might approach it differently and say that, where the longer running context is, going back to colonial period is key, is not necessarily in terms of salaries per se. Because nowadays we pay our political office holders and
crazy
more than they would gain, if they were like this celebrity was saying, if you really want to enjoy your money, go to Africa, be rich in Africa. That's where you really enjoy being rich. So these guys get paid more than their counterparts elsewhere, and corruption continues. So I don't know that if we want to tell the story starting from the colonial period, the key point to point out is, the level of pay. I think probably to me, it seems more so the context of domination that's important to point out, if we're drawing a line to the colonial period, because when there's a thief in your house, and the thief is giving you an allowance just so you continue to survive while they exploit your resources, you're going to act in very crazy ways. I mean, you might not necessarily create a rational budgetary process for how you're going to spend that allowance. So I think, the wider context of domination, that continues into this, and I think this is where Emeka is talking about the possibility of British sabotage, which we'll come back to, is important to consider if we're thinking about, the prehistory of this scandal. And then, of course, the war itself, the destruction and the end of the war. But, as Emeka is saying, the fact that the destruction at the end of the war necessitated a kind of developmental push doesn't explain why that push had to focus on barracks. And I think that tells more a story of the military feeling insecure, that because it was coup prone and very centralized in Lagos, the desire to shift some of the officers out of Lagos and have them manage their own little fiefdoms, which I think is a model of the state that also has been replicated in the creation of states and the expansion of, the Nigerian state itself. But I think that approach to thinking about development as let's minimize the risk of, like a coup in a centralized barrack system, definitely created a more immediate context where scams of this sort and others became much
even with
more
the urgency with which things were done.
Yeah, exactly. The desire to do it immediately.
Let me make a case for those who would want to maybe not dwell, but who would maybe want to wait, the colonial state that we inherited. It's less about inadequacies of salary, right? I think, and more the fact that the colonial enterprise, for a long time was grossly underfunded, right?
Sure.
It wasn't even planned. Planning didn't begin in, the colonial outpost, of which Nigeria was one, and a significant one, at least in Western Africa, until after the Second World War. And it started because there were agitations for independence, all right? And then somewhere in India already, people who were clamoring for this their own independence could see models or something that they could aspire to. But I think what really was the case, especially with Nigeria, was that I think it's often forgotten, maybe not forgotten, maybe that's not the word to use. I think it's often overlooked that even the method of administration, which was indirect rule, was the function of the fact that there was not much funding.
It was a smart way to do colonialism cheaply because they were broke.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that's structural.
Yes, so that meant that the structure that would evolve from that kind of one policy framework, that way of administrating a colony would naturally be one that was inefficient, and it was on many levels. Very many. Even just looking at education at the time, funding until missionaries came in. And why even education was the exclusive preserve of rich kids or part of the elite of society. But I think this time was the first time, like we have established that this was the first time that we're seeing this within an independent state and seeing the inefficiency cause us national embarrassment. So what we're thinking now is, was this something that was planned from the point of view of economic sabotage, or was it something that was corruption induced? If we're fleshing it, so to open it up,
we'll certainly come to that. No, that makes sense. I mean, we'll certainly come to that. But I would still want to emphasize the context of domination there, when we talk about these inefficiencies, because
they're the same thing. It's just different sectors. There are different sectors because sorry to flesh out.
No, but I mean,
let me just chip in.
Okay, after you.
Yeah, let me just chip in because the thing is that system for it to work, look at that indirect rule now, because class antagonism is done already there. And you get people will be saying then so they won't make their cut from the substrates where the British the thief themselves won't chop inside. Then it means that whatever they do, they're already there to cut corners. So if the thing can't evolve, it will come to get numerous dimensions up until when you they cut pipeline, they plug your own pipe, where we just see last month. Like these are the things that we will be seeing in different ways. Be it cement, you go get where they go thief money from there. Be it oil, you go get where they go thief money from there. And the thing where even they're more vexing, we go come seem like inefficiency to us and say it's actually a cheaper way to run things anyhow and take the most money from it. Look at this trend line that they're doing in Lagos State. Yeah. We know the kind of money the cost they use to them. I know, and they go to tell you, say, they procure this one down. No, man. The more you duplicate things and make sure that the money to get them is higher than like mad, is the more that you can stash away. So a road we're supposed to do for like 100 million. You go just gonna do like say you do mistake, administrative this and then do them for like 250 million. Whereas we know where the money they go. We know say that kind of 150 now. Some kind of people they share them, slice them. That it is in doing that so-called mistake or administrative whatever, and that's non-planning. That's not where your own juice they come from. So from the outside, it seems as if they make mistakes, but they've been making these mistakes. They don't burn us.
Go
ahead. Like I'd like to clarify something.
I like that we're having this debate. I mean, even if not all of it will go into the recording, but I think it's really good that we actually just clarify this point before we go further. So I mean, when I'm talking about domination, right? And I think, there's an extent to which OAG is summing it up well, but I think maybe there's still something else I'm trying to address that isn't fully captured by the use of inefficiency to create opportunities for corruption. I mean, that's just one iteration of how it might manifest. Yeah. But I think that because of the wider context where there's a thief in your house, do you know what I mean? Like somebody's foot is on your neck and you're being...
And you just do how many I say, we'll make it.
There's a certain anyhowness that sets in because you're like, I mean, the way we've been doing things before that was deemed legitimate, or at least that we'd managed to secure some buy-in from our people, that thing has been thrown up in the air by the context of being conquered by a foreign power. So within that scenario where you've just been conquered by a foreign power and then they're giving you some kind of allowance from your own money, at least the taxes that you would ordinarily have collected yourself, I mean, for the centralized societies that were being brought into this colonial system, then, I mean, there's a certain kind of like ridiculousness to the entire project. And I think the ridiculousness does not go away after independence because, we enter into a neocolonial context, and this is where we start talking about
cemented ridiculousness.
Yes, we start talking about the possibility of sabotage and, these somewhat naive army officers trying to engage with the global cement market. So that's what I'm talking about, Emeka, when I talk about the
domination.
The context of domination. Not to excuse what these people did by no stretch, but just to point out that, in fact, there's an extent to which the overarching structure is itself morally bankrupt and corrupt. So in that context, then people are improvising and, it's like if your boss is stealing, then he's stealing from you. Then chances are that you also start to think, okay, then what's the point? Which
is why I wouldn't wait, the payment of salary or...
Yeah, me neither. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, which is why I wouldn't rate it because... like I said earlier on, there's the marketing board scam, even before the Cement Armada scam. And part of
and by the way, we should do something on marketing board scam.
Part of the fallout of
Scam Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Part of the fallout of the marketing board scam is the fact that Nigeria became almost inextricably welded into
international
the orbit of
finance.
global capitalism from the point of views of the multinationals. Okay. So that even when you had an elected government, they were almost always doing the bidding of the multinationals, and they were doing this so that they could get kickbacks. Okay. The marketing board, without going into it, was arranged such that the middlemen, who were often members of the political elite class, were getting
Into their own cuts from there.
at the detriment of
the laborers and the farmers
who were laboring on the farmland. In this particular instance, it's a contractual thing, which is why it's a bit different. And now how then they take markup contracts,
Sure.
But the point that I want to make here is that if you listen and if you give him that benefit of doubt, Larkin Smith guy, who was the deputy to the Secretary of Defense,
to the PEMSEC,
in the Ministry of Defense, you hear him out. His reason for the markup was that the organ of government, which was already tasked with procurement or supplies, and not just cement, in general, had already ordered for, I think, 2 million tons of cement, right? The Ministry of Defense, for just demobilization of military personnel after the war, in terms of building barracks, in parts and different parts of Nigeria, had earmarked 2.9 million tons, about 3 million tons, what they thought was going to be what they needed to go on the project that they wanted to go on. But the Nigerian state, which the country, the organ which is responsible for these supplies and procurement, had already made orders.
Yeah, that's the National Supply Company.
Yeah, the National Supply. Yeah, thank you. The National Supply made orders for what was already the shortfall as a result of the war. This is something that Saheed alluded to earlier on. So those supplies hadn't even come. You understand? And even if they had come, what would have been marked for, based on the needs of the Nigerian, the country itself, what would have been marked from that portion for the military would have just been 30,000 tons, as opposed to about 3 million tons, something like less than maybe 10% of what they needed. So there's a need for them to order. Now, where these discrepancies within administrative bottlenecks and total collapse of even the inefficiency or ineffectiveness of administrative controls was that there should have been a way for the Ministry of Defense to plug in those orders through the right channel without having to go on their own. Now that's where economic sabotage begins to scream out at me. Why didn't they go that route? Do you understand? So is it enough to say because we inherited a system that wasn't fit for purpose, that couldn't cater for the needs, administrative needs of a country that had just become independent and was growing, especially in size, whether you think about it in terms of military or
population
or civil service, you understand? But that markup, the guy says was so that he could get suppliers to supply faster.
Yes.
Now, why did they need that speed? That's my own question. Why did they need it done ASAP? Which is where I think that those who make the arguments for corruption might have a field day saying that Gowon was in the know.
Well, but there's a political argument for why MOD was the one to place the order and see it through, and B, why they needed it to happen so quickly. Both of those things can be kind of rationalized within the normal framework of politics at the time, normal in inverted commas, obviously. And it's because like, well, on the MOD side, like the military was in charge. So in a sense, Ministry of Defense was where decisions were getting made anyway. You know what I mean? So that's like, you know, just the centralizing impulse of having come out of a war. Ministry of Defense is like, and of course, you know, through the context of the war, the Army Engineers Corps becomes really strong, right? The sappers. So that whole context then means that for the, you know, army officers overseeing the state, like working through MOD just seemed like a more sensible, probably like a more second natured pursuit, right? And then secondly, like, you know, we talked about already.
It turns out that it wasn't sensible.
Yes. You know, it turned out to be terribly problematic, but, you know, probably not only just because it wasn't the formal procurement wing of the government, but also because they just didn't plan with the ports in mind, you know, which is the wider failure of thinking about planning, and, you know, raises a real question for those people who say like the state shouldn't plan and the market should just operate naturally or whatever. But, you know, before I mean, the last thing I want to say is in terms of the political logic of the speed is like, is the cool risk, you know, that Gowon was probably feeling really keen to move the senior military officers that had fought in the war outside of Lagos and so that they can have their own fiefdoms. And then secondly, he wanted, because Gowon's promise was that Nigeria was supposed to be transitioning to democracy at this point in time.
Now
he wanted,
this
is a political logic. Like he wanted the team to deliver something and also probably to make himself popular enough that that he benefited
amongst the military officers, their barracks, or if you want popular, amongst the people is about. So, but now
that's true. But there's now you get within they call military Keynesianism, right? Which the US practices. Which is that, like, you know what I mean? Like, you develop the military, feed the, you develop the military, and then there's a kind of trickle down that's supposed to happen from there. You know, like you pay the military salaries, you give them nice things,
education and all that.
Exactly. And then like, that's how you develop society. So it almost seems like there's some of that in operation here.
You see, the thing plenty. The literature, the one I've come across, would usually suggest that at the end of 1974, Gowon reneged on the promise to move Nigeria, that transition to civilian rule, right? And that a lot of that was compounded by the Cement Armada. I tend to think about it differently. I think that the Cement Armada was one major plank in the reasons why he then decided to jettison
the transition.
That transition.
That makes sense. No, I mean the money, but also like you don't want a civilian government coming into power and then trying to review those contracts
at all.
I mean, but now let's talk about. But now let's talk about the contracts themselves, right? Because I think we've really set the backdrop. So, in 1971, for all the reasons that we've tried to analyze, the Ministry of Defense then decides that let them start issuing contracts to global cement suppliers to bring cement to Nigeria at $60 a ton. So as you said, that was above market price. And actually what they ordered was dramatically above what they had predetermined that they needed.
16 million tons.
Exactly. So they said they needed
opposed to 3 million.
Exactly. So the higher estimate of what they needed was 3 million, right? But then what they ordered was 16 million. And now you guys have partially been debating like the reason why it ended up being 16 million, right? And OAG, it sounds like is like that from the get-go was just creating an opportunity for scam. It sounds like Emeka has been saying that, look, there was a bit of a rationale there, and some of the literature suggests, some of the stuff we were reading suggests that there was a little bit of a justification for trying to order much more than you thought you needed, because the thing is that the global market was not operating efficiently. So
and make yours cover
there had
that
been
gap.
orders before, there had been orders before that were not delivered. Yeah. So there was this belief that, look, since we have this oil money anyway, why don't we sell it at the price that we think we can pay, and then order more than we need, and then we figure out how to deal with that after the fact, So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, do you think it was really more of an issue of them just trying to find a way to make money at the outset, or do you think really it was more of a response to that, like, inefficient, that kind of market failure, at the onset that made them then inflate the orders so dramatically?
The thing is,
that was what it was initially. Sorry, OAG.
No problem.
That's what it was initially, right?
Right.
Until the Nigerian factor sets in. So
see.
Yeah, no, but you see, I agree with you too, but I just want us to pick this thing one by one.
Course,
I mean, at least benefit of our listeners. It's not, I don't totally.
Not the same, we'll just go on.
Yeah. So you don't, as of March, when they begin issue these contracts, you understand? Cement no day. People don't order cement no day. We they produce because of the war. 2 cement factories in the southern eastern part of Nigeria, somewhere around Enugu and Calabar, they produce, so we don't lose 60% of our production capacity locally. All right. So we had to import cement to make up for our needs, which was about 1 million tons annually. Okay. Sure. But this particular year, 1974, go on seeing the kind of money we don't come from oil boom, say, okay, we want demobilize and we need to build barracks. So the Ministry of Defense say they calculate what they need at 3 million tons. They first go fix the price at 60, where the market price was something between 53, maybe $54. Yeah. Meanwhile, once they fix that price at 60, they don't issue the contract out to some people, right? Yeah. Part of how they went about this, which is why I say now stupidity, they worry some of these guys. They now went through the high commissions, ambassadors, rather than go through this organ of government that it is his job.
And neo-colonial arrangement.
You understand? Now go through.
But is it necessarily because neo-colonial arrangement plays out in many ways. Because why did they need to go through? Because, even till today, right? If you're doing government procurement, sometimes you put out public tender and we still neo-colonial arrangement. So why did you have to go through the most ridiculous kind of approach here, going through the ambassadors to get people to order, to get people to submit?
What my own this will be that the farther you take those processes away from the prying eyes of people, the better you can make your cuts.
Yeah, but I mean, I know I interrupted you, Emeka, if you want to finish your thought, but I mean, it seems to me like that it wasn't inevitable that they would want to take it away from the prying eyes.
You want to give these people some sort of nationalism?
Yeah, because not to say that was all that was happening, but I mean,
of course, definitely.
I don't think we should remove that entirely because.
No, I'm not removing
it. The way that people were rationalizing it after the fact, even people who disagreed with it, suggest that they thought this was a good idea. Do you know what I mean? And in fact, they were like, okay, given that we fixed the price, we don't have to do open bidding, right?
Just make it come, then we go meet his needs, Abby.
Exactly. We just have some panel assess the submissions and then obviously it proved to be fantastically ridiculous, but I mean, this is kind of where they were coming from, right? I mean, Emeka, maybe that's where you were going before I interrupted.
No, so I mean, for me, it's that whole process, of what they did, which on the surface of it is probably not a terrible idea, but you cannot control it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what then happened was that by the end of that year, the ports, so the orders will never come before, come. You understand? So by the end of the year, you already had 2 million tons
Sitting there.
There. Okay. Meanwhile, Nigeria had the capacity, the ports itself had, their papa ports had the capacity to offload just 1 million annually. Then by November, in 1 month, we're saying this is a port that has a capacity for 1 million a year. In 1 month, they had 2 million that they had to offload. So that congestion just happened. Yeah. As soon as that one happened, other people with other orders, with ambassador,
they just started the plugging.
So you now see people who even had people who even had the contracts started to sell their contracts.
And then this is where the contract racket itself
then sets in. And once the contract racket sets in, he then puts pressure on the wharf. So he then sets the demurrage, triggers the demurrage.
Well, let's make sure we clarify what that contract racket is before we enter the demurrage thing itself.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a scenario where, because these contracts were being given at a generous price, people then started to hustle for the contract itself. And in fact, the thing is that based on the conditions, only Nigerians could get the contract, So Nigerians were going to seek the contract and then sell them off to the international cement market because the commissions were enormous. Like, I think the commissions were something like $4 a ton. And since the average contract was like 240,000 tons, like just getting the contract and selling it would fetch you something like $960,000. Right? So then there was a huge scramble to get cement contract. And then the notion of cement contract, which even till today you still hear resonating somehow in Nigerian public discourse, was created. And there was even a story that one of the people quoted, one of the authors talking about this thing, where a lady was just passing by and saw a crowd. And then she asked the crowd, hey, what's happening here? And they said, oh, they're waiting for cement contract. And then somehow she managed to get one of the contracts. And the contract ended up being worth $14 million.
That one reminds me of Festus Iyayi's violence.
I know, honestly. And I think, violence almost deserves its own conversation.
It does.
But government officials who were close to the contracting process, engineers, even in one reading, even one member of British Parliament, ended up being part of the whole scramble to get contracts, during this period.
From the Labour Party.
From the Labour Party, for that matter. Wait, was he Labour? I thought he was a Tory.
I think it was Labour, and then he couldn't get. He wasn't re-elected or something, and then he decided
nothing. Yeah, I think he blew back.
Yeah, perfect, right? So it created a kind of global contracting racket. And then this led, of course, to a massive expansion of the number of contracts issued, and by the end of it, something like 67 contracts had been issued, which is why, despite us having said that we needed something like 2.9 million tons, something like
16 they sit for there
coming. So then it brings us to the demurrage thing that Emeka was about to talk about.
Yeah, just the sale of contracts, you understand? Just the sale of contracts to multinationals or white businesses or just white businessmen, because people who actually got this contract, they were not vetted. It became, like you said, a racket. So the Secretary of Defense, they give his own people. Some guy in Navy, they give his own people. So all the guys who were close to the government or the Gowon administration, who were high profile people around him, started to get this contract. And then because they didn't even have the capacity, they didn't even know how to start with it. So they now started to resell. So among the international community, people then realized that the Nigerian government they give contract for at least 240,000 metric tons.
Yes.
Now, as they sell the contract, then they ask for $4, is it $4 kickback? Yeah, $4 kickback per ton. So
no, that's just commission.
No, but what it was priced in, that $4 was priced into the contract, because once you fix the price,
yeah, that's the point. So not kickback as such, but just the commission.
And the commission, and then the market price at the time was somewhere around $56, $52, $53, $55. You understand? There's a margin of profit for the person you're selling to. You understand? But meanwhile, you're getting $4. So for each ton, you're getting $4. Multiply that by 240,000. So that's almost $1 million for just doing nothing.
Dollars, $1 million.
That's why they work.
$1 million. Yeah, for doing
$960,000 roughly.
$960,000 for doing absolutely nothing. So once this thing started to fly, people even started to fake letters of credit. You understand? So it became a huge international scam that even involved royalties, spies, and So obviously, what then happened was that even ships that weren't even carrying cargo,
anything, they
could just come patch. They no say some ships don't need 200 days. They never offload them. So their owner just to carry fake letter, won't submit, say their own ship, they water, say that they eligible for do more.
And then to clarify, like the reason why really the ships were arriving. So again, because so many contracts were issued, there was a large amount of ships coming anyway, right? But then when those ships arrived, one of the conditions in the contract was that for every extra day that the ship had to sit in the port, the Nigerian government had to pay them something like $4,100 a day.
It initially wasn't 4,100 though.
In fact,
something
that's
like
true.
2,000. In the middle of all of this madness,
yes,
it was initially 3,500, and then the government increased the price during the period when the ships were piling up. And the ship started receiving 4,100 a day for each day.
Where themselves will get caught later inside.
So at that point, it's at that point that you then had ships going somewhere else. Ships on the high sea heading to another destination. Well, I show. Make we branch Lagos Port. Sit there for some.
Collect our.
Well, this way they talk now so everywhere bill.
I know now.
Ministry of Defense don't do it own. With their own people. They don't get those ones don't chop. You understand?
Make everybody chop.
Waiting then chop now don't trigger
backlog for contract sale.
You understand?
Contract
so they don't
chopping.
open their own office. You understand? So once you now ripple effect of opening office round and round.
The office just they open. Administrative block.
So then let me read a line from this British legal case that came up in the aftermath of the scandal, just to illustrate the point about the ships, right? So the presiding judge in the case said this, that one of the authors quoted. In practically every one of those ships, the bills of lading, that's the receipts with a detailed listing of the ship's cargo, appeared as if there had been a ship which had changed its name. I made out that they were shipped at a port in Greece called Volos. When the solicitor from London went to Greece, he found out that it was all moonshine in effect. They never had any of those ships on Volos at all. And Volos had not got the quantity of cement or anything like it to fulfill these supposed bills of lading. What is more, the harbour master did not know of any being put on board or sent forward and so forth. So a very strong case was made out that these bills of lading were not genuine at all. They were forged in respect of the goods which never existed, which is to say that there were, in some cases, empty ships sitting there or ships that never even arrived, still claiming that $4,000 a day. So at this stage, like you all were saying, it just becomes a kind of feeding trough. Yeah. So, I guess at this point in time, we can probably move on to the stage where the government starts to try to respond to this crisis and tries to stem the crisis. But before then, a critical issue happens, which is that a coup occurs that brings down the Gowon government, as has been stated, partially because of this ridiculous situation that the government had dragged the country into, but also because, for the reasons America suggested, the government reneged on its promise to transition the country to democracy. So then an arbitration process kicks off where the government creates a committee in 1975 called the Cement Contracts Negotiation Committee. And the committee was CCNC. It was supposed to bargain down the claims of the ships that were genuinely there, and then also discover what ships were sitting there collecting demurrage fraudulently. So this was the work the committee was doing. But then, so of course, like for the large cement suppliers, the committee tried to urge them to settle their contracts, with partial payment on the promise that they would then become favored suppliers after the whole thing was resolved. And then, but then for the small suppliers, who didn't have cement business but just got into it, obviously they knew that they wouldn't be able to supply later on. They were keen to get their money then and there, right? So then it creates a situation where various levels of cement suppliers are competing to try to get compensation when this committee, is also incentivized to come to settlements. So at the end of the day, according to some of the sources we're reading, it created another opportunity for fraud. Yeah, because the members of the panel themselves then started to collect bribes from various suppliers to see if they could get them a favorable settlement. So it means that the attempt to resolve the scam itself
created more scam
embedded within the wider scam that was ongoing. So, how would you guys react to that before we try to bring the story to a close? So, I know you're going to say this is the same post-colonial condition, but then why did they make an attempt at some point to try to bring this into negotiation?
The PR, it's if they do PR at times now, administrative PR, they go do public relations and all that, But again, when you don't get antagonistic relationship between the people where they rule you and the people where they rule, they go come with some kind of facade. Oh, okay, now off the mic, don't put on the mic. No be the same thing. Where that guy did now, where they talk say off the mic, that Niger Delta Commission guy, waiting be his name. I don't forget his name. They make her remind me, please. Where then they? Orubebe, Abi. No, don't be Orubebe. Don't be Orubebe. The guy recently where they say off the mic now. No, off the mic.
Okay. No, I don't know that guy.
Yeah, see.
Paramilitary guy.
Yeah, where they off the mic with this contract scam where they get this oil thing. It's the same thing. The ruling class will always want to show up as if they get some kind of self-cleansing mechanism. As to, the thing that we'll try correct them. But inside of one, because they're so embedded in this thievery, another office open. Yeah. And this is how they've been doing it. Like if you me, where we say I near all this kind, you go, they see them like that, like they avenue.
Which major conviction they even get? They don't even get any.
They don't get anything.
But then keep in mind that this is happening, at the period where the Murtala government comes into office, right? And they had just overthrown Gowon.
Which is why it's funny that there was no major. Nobody paid any major price for it.
They know they ever pay a major price.
No, sure.
That was even fingered,
but that's where we're getting at. So I guess to me it seems like the Murtala coming into power, on the backing of a kind of populist movement, has some incentive to try to clean up the system. But then, the way it was set up was one that allowed for a lot of, cheating on the side. And then the question reemerges again as to whether this was just a matter of stupidity, or whether it was designed in such a way that it was bound to fail, or whether, or whether it was like just sabotaged by people participating. And I think that's a question that really runs through the entire event. And maybe it's hard to really pick one out of all those options. And it seems like it's possible they were interacting dynamically, right?
It's good to look at it from every juncture of where major events happened. At the point of the contract, now like, oh, this thing. At the point of when the ship they do this, now like this thing. At the point of when they want to do inquiry, like say this. At what point do you maybe say you feel say they thief from you? How come come down heavy on the the erring bodies or the people who do the crime and all that, And it's the same thing that we see with Nigeria is that anytime the elites or people that are high up in power, they commit any kind of crime, nobody they actually pay, except if intra-elite struggle day. Then they go on make example of one or two people, as they do with Tafa Balogun that time, or with some few people like that. They go on do but nobody actually they pay the price. And this now it might have evolved, from say that oversight and the weakness of new nations to actually be in charge of anything. But if to say they get that real answering to the people, they will have dealt with decisively all the members of the ruling class, and they don't be something where they go cover up, maybe say, or maybe say everything go on the open office. But no, deal with anybody. So not even incentive to enter crime, and say nobody go deal with you. And that's why these people steal so much when they know say, okay, even if we steal like $100 billion, I know say by the time where I spend like 20, everything go deal okay. I go chill with 80, see investments. That kind of thing. So they don't get that.
The thing we say, like I
Wait,
said,
Emeka, you differ. It's like we know they hear you.
I don't differ. Sorry. The thing, like me, am I more audible?
It's better.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, I think, like I said, what perhaps started out as an honest mistake,
it's in just spiral,
snowballed into one of the biggest embarrassments, scandals of Nigerian history. Okay. But for me, now this part of the whole, the timeline of events, this part where Muritala come in, then set up commission of inquiry turned out to be toothless.
Yeah.
Like all other commission of inquiries
they ever set up
from colonial time. So nobody was prosecuted. The worst anybody got was a slap on the wrist, which then emboldened thieves.
Let's go back to
But you don't already a mistake. The one small mistake don't show.
Don't open.
No, it don't show both the Nigerian elite and the Nigerian business.
Don't show them pathway
and the international business community. You understand? Because even in the literature, it goes this far to say that it showed people what was possible. This then led to what you call the 419 scam.
No, but wait before you get into the long-running implication. There's one more phase of the thing to analyze, and then we can talk about the legacies and the long-running impact.
No, I'm just mentioning that in passing. I'm not even dwelling on it. I'm just saying that the fact says we no fit probe anybody. You understand? Then embolden people. Then, of course, people who don't see what's in there possible now use weaponizer. So that fast forward to 1999, 2000, turn of the Fourth Republic, they get sitting former Dick Cheney, former Vice President of America.
Okay, are they come. Now you're really getting into the meat of this. Let me hold you on that thought. Keep everybody in suspense as to what you want to say about Dick Cheney. And let's get through the final aspect, the final pillar of the thing, which I think is important to talk about, which is that, we were talking about the arbitration process. I mean, not the kind of committee to review the contracts. That one basically failed. And then they put in place a commission of inquiry to review that. But the commission of inquiry actually came later, right? It was the final attempt to make sense of what had happened, even though nobody ultimately was punished as a result of that commission. But it did at least produce a report, which is part of how we know what we're discussing here, is that the report of that commission actually told a fairly detailed story about what had happened. It's just that it didn't punish anyone. But before it got to that point of reviewing the whole thing, the Nigerian government made one final attempt to recoup some of the losses or to stop the bleeding. And that was when it went to the UK. And I believe at this point, this is under Obasanjo, because it's
Obasanjo.
Yeah, it's a case that kicked off 76, 77. So Gawan had also, in the midst of trying to make sense of this stuff, mysteriously been killed, right? The head of state. And of course, there are other reasons why Murtala was killed, pardon me. But, it was in the context of this crazy crisis that was continuing into 75, into 76. And so in the UK, the Nigerian government was trying to stop some of the contracts that still hadn't been fulfilled. But then this sparked a case in the UK courts where the courts were trying to demand that the Nigerian government pay up on those contracts, despite the fact that due to the port congestion, they had never been filled. And so the Nigerian the lawyers representing the Nigerian government attempted to argue that the contract was secured improperly, right? Because as we know, there was a lot of corruption in the contracting process. But then apparently several individuals in the UK government refused to allow the Nigerian lawyers see evidence that they themselves had collected about suggesting that there had been bribery, right? And in the midst of that case, the UK House of Lords passed what is called the State Immunity Act of 1978. Which was an act, it was an act precluding any possibility of a different legal outcome, right? Because it basically meant that governments couldn't come and say, based on sovereignty, they would not fulfill contracts taken out with the UK brokers. So at this point, then the government was legally bound to finish paying off those contracts, despite the fact that many of them had not been filled and loads of them were acquired fraudulently. So this is the context of domination I'm talking about, that you have a context where foreign governments, individuals in foreign governments are participating in securing contracts. The banks, which are funding some of the people sitting in those parliamentary seats, are giving insurance policies or giving loans to those shipping companies to come and bring that cement. And then when the whole thing is proven to be a scam, that foreign government stands in the way of your post-colonial state attempting to mop up what little it can to stop this process from degenerating. So, how would you respond, before we move on to the implications, to that aspect of this wider situation where you have foreign governments actually stepping in to back their own citizenry and prevent, the state with a somewhat legitimate claim to wanting to stop these contracts from doing so?
But this is where the scam really, when you think about this is where I think about it as a bigger scam, and has nothing to do essentially with just corruption within the Nigerian government. All right. And which is why I date some of these things back to even at least the marketing boards, So there's already an arrangement, and that arrangement, you can go back to some of our constitution to see how they became institutionalized, such that part of what we did in terms of flag independence was to exchange political power for, to get political power in exchange for, and relinquish economic power. So what that in effect meant was that as long as there are arrangements that that was negotiated, for our independence by the likes of Awolowo, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and Tafawa Balewa of this world, was that multinational corporations would always do business and must be guaranteed that they will recoup on their investments, or that they will recoup on whatever it is that,
irrespective of whether
it hurts the Nigerian economy,
whether the contract. Whether the person who gave you the contract is now free.
I think that's a crux.
There were millions of dollars at stake in this scam or in this with respect to the Cement Armada and people who have supplied cement, whether they had supplied one we don't kick or the ones we never kick, were entitled to get their money, and they didn't care whose ox was God. Nobody gave a fuck about Nigeria, and it was about money for the suppliers, money for the banks, right?
On the DOD guys, I said Department of Defense, Ministry of Defense.
Those ones now, they are on for $4 that they get now. The main $50-something dollars where they at stake. Those people and the demo. Don't forget, we're paying demo radio to ship it down.
And this to me, I think, is one of the key things to highlight. Is that from the point of view of who made money in this scam, the Nigerian side of the picture, they learn
the lesser money. Yes, so now which there's a front end and back end of this scam.
and Said, we haven't gone to what it meant for the Nigerian economy in terms of that we couldn't even export. So you then begin to trade, check balance of payments and how it affected our balance of payments because of the congestion. There was no room for exports. There was no even room for import of construction materials. Meant.
So we're talking about the implications now, which is fine. I mean, I think we should then dive into it. But I mean, I think a final note, and this will come up stronger in the implications, the final note about the scam itself and how it ended is that the government then issued a contract at some point to Julius Berger to build a totally new set of port facilities. Which is now known as Tinkan Island. So this is how Tinkan Island was built.
Came into being.
Yeah, in 1976 or 77.
Yes, they won the contract to build Tinkan Island in July of 76, under the condition that it would be built in 15 months. And by the way, at the same time, Julius Berger was also building the ring road around Lagos.
Which one be Lagos Ring Road again? They don't rename them, I'm sure, but.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be that Marina Road, the one that cuts off, that goes, around kind of what's Lagos Island.
But Julius Berger no get problem now. They had cement day port now just to go carry.
No.
But apparently they needed other things like bitumous, all these other components. I don't know the components, but presumably it's not only cement. And then also,
so now Nigeria make Julius Berger now because they don't be anything for Germany.
So then this is one of the key implications. I mean, and we can now go through the implications systematically. But I think the first one that we need to highlight is that this process, apparently, whereby Julius Berger was awarded this massive contract to create Tinkan Island, was how Julius Berger really amassed its first real nest egg of capital. And the fact is, Julius Berger delivered, one of the few people who at this point in time got a Nigerian government contract and actually delivered. Within that, the time frame of 15 months and even slightly earlier, Julius Berger managed to create, to build and open up this Tinkan Island port, which then released the backlog and in a sense, bailed the Nigerian government out of what had been an interminable and super embarrassing crisis. But then the outcome, as Emeka was just alluding to, is that Julius Berger as such, as this massive construction firm that is then sort of inaugurated as Nigeria's kind of preferred
face of construction.
Yes, which then partially explains, I think, why Julius Berger, one of the reasons why Julius Berger participated in or became the key contractor for the building of Abuja as a new national capital. Another potential scam that I think we should give its own space.
At about the same time.
Sometime down the line. Yeah, exactly. With that contract being issued in roughly the same period at the end of the Obasanjo transition. So now, I mean...
It's ironic though, how we had an oil boom that should have led to expansion of critical
infrastructure. Can't be.
We're going to end up with another port.
Yeah,
So
right.
that we will fit the imports, which we don't need. Then we're not even fit the export with Nigeria is.
No, so I mean, as we kind of draw the conversation to a conclusion, there are numerous implications that one could highlight, and we've already done so with certain, standout ones. But, if you had to pick, like, for you, what you think were some of the central legacies or long-running impacts of this scam, what would you say they were? And I know you've already started alluding to some, Emeka, so do you want to start?
I mean, for me, it's like I said, the irony of what we ended up in terms of infrastructure. So we ended up with another point, okay, which of course is there as a testament to our appetite for consumption. So we needed more ports to be able to bring in more goods that we were consuming. Basically, now the story of the Nigerian state. But much more than that, I think that most critically is the missed opportunity that we had to expand what critical infrastructures that would have aided development, road networks, trains maybe rather earlier on, all sorts of public, good that we could have used that boom to. So when you say economic sabotage, this is where it resonates most with me. So some British dickhead, who for some reason was in a very, very critical position at the time in the 70s, decides that the windfall from oil, where we suppose expand on this critical infrastructure, we go carry and give banks, shippers, multinationals.
So global capitalism
in the West, and then whatever came to Nigeria found its way into the pockets of a handful of idiots who collaborated, mindlessly with him, even though maybe that wasn't even the intent.
That's always what it becomes. That's always what it becomes.
They were not beneficiaries, that were, they were not even masterminds in the first place. So I think that in itself is that story of the 70s. And don't forget that just by don't forget by 77 or 78, when this fix finally came into play. Not long after that, by 81, the Nigerian economy was already in a recession.
And the oil boom had already started to burst, I think, by 78, 79, right?
By 78, 79. And some other thing that I think we missed out was that part of the reason why, this might be us going back, but I think it's important that part of the reason why the Nigerian government even had challenges with cement, in terms of how many tons we needed, to produce locally, was that it was also around the same period that the cultural event known as Festac 77 was being organized, and then we were pumping money into building, and if you go to the art space and you hear the criticisms around, this is something that Fela even criticized himself, Soyinka did criticize at some point, about what we were trying to achieve with Festac 77, so all of that period just shows you the kind of waste that the Gowon government, especially, and also the Obasanjo government also, were instrumental to. I think I'll end by highlighting the point I was trying to make earlier on, that if there's anybody who benefited from knowledge of this and weaponized it,
it's Dick Cheney.
It's both Obasanjo and his Dick Cheney, with Atiku being the beneficiary of, because, so it's about how these things are being weaponized and how they, and look, think about it for a minute. The same Atiku who is running for president was in the customs at the time.
He was in the ports.
Maybe,
in the ports at the time.
Making money.
you go know how you don't take understand the Nigerian system. And that's now for those people who won't vote next year. I mean, if you like, you give up too. Maybe this time now,
the whole country.
They've already said that.
Now pure water Armada we go get.
OG, any thoughts? What
my own I say structurally, and I always like go by that thing. Like, if you get pathway of how neocolonialism they play out, and then you understand where it always ends up, like, that now that fan on Wretched of the Earth, that pitfalls of national consciousness is very important, because it states say these people, they no go ever do anything that go benefit the people. If you come across as mistake, or if you come, they just trace the money. That partnership that we have with the West, they unequal. But because of that class antagonism, where they then go take the small cut, and then the parties for abroad, maybe our colonial boss before, they go take the big cuts, and they are willing and okay with that arrangement. So if it means they are going to take the country and waste, in quotes, money on one white elephant project, in fact, what they need to do is to keep on opening avenues for wastages, so that the money will keep on flowing. That's their own work. And ensure that, okay, at the end of the day, float to this company, float that company, go collect your own kickback for Switzerland or whatever, So, and you see that that's the pathway that the Nigerian elite has been following till today. So when structurally, just follow the money, and you see that, what these people have, they might start off with that fake sense of nationalism, and we are going to do this one, put up a show, like they're setting up panels and all that. But it always never leads to anything, any prosecution, dealing with anybody. It never leads to that, because that arrangement already, they were enmeshed with international finance capital. And then look at what Britain did with saying that, one kind act where they pass, so we no go fit query anything. And they were fine, just fine with it. You go try that with small Cuba now. Maybe they show you, say, they small, but if you step on top small office pen, you go see waiting do your leg. That kind of thing.
So then declassify some of this record.
See, I'm like, this thing is crazy. They are declassified as the information what you need. They just give 2010. So like me, I tend to, in as much as for a intellectual this thing, they're good to observe those sides and all. But once when I don't follow that structure, say these people, as long as that antagonism, anything that they come up with in terms of big projects, now always they could not embed that padding, budget padding, contract padding. It opens a Pandora's box of different, ways.
Into origins of contract padding now.
Stealing money, stealing in different ways, and that's what we should. Anytime these guys in government say they want to do something, just keep on watching out for that. They are doing one now that will pop later on in future that we'll see. Obasanjo has done his own with Siemens, with this electricity thing. The oil guys and refineries, they've done their own. The Cement Armada don't happen. Marketing board don't happen. Which others can we, like Lagos State Rail, whatever he did there. So on a small scale and large scale, these guys are always, in fact, it's their job to open up avenues for wastages, for where they can carve out money from the public purse so that they can share it with their guys. Even if it's that they take the lesser chunk of the money. So that's how I'll leave it. And that's one thing.
Even if that is structured for them, they don't get them. They don't get the mastermind.
They don't get. See our oil extraction. Shell they there, but they go do that oil block this thing for antagonistic ownership of the means of production. So they go just say, okay, now we don't own the oil block. Now Shell continue to take money. So even if you account for the amount of oil they come out, just give me my own $5 million, make they go. And Shell take like for doing nothing. Like,
but you see, I guess, if I come in here with a couple other ones I would highlight, I think that how the scandal came to an end is also very interesting for understanding this question of the Nigerian elite and how it wants to be embedded in capital, or the ways in which it gets embedded, sometimes as a junior partner. I think bringing in Julius Berger and basically through this process, constructing Julius Berger as this massive now probably main construction firm in Nigeria. And mind you, even though Julius Berger markets itself as a German firm, partially because of Nigerian law, but partially because of the business interests of Nigerians, it's actually mainly Nigerian in its ownership. And it's actually, it's a Nigerian company, really. So I think this process also taught the Nigerian government that, look, aside from this contract padding and all this stuff, which can scandalous and embarrassing, why don't we embourgeois ourselves?
Yes,
why don't we also get into the business of business itself? Because in the state, you're only likely to be a junior partner. Do you know what I mean? But as a market competitor, particularly when you also have your own people in the state, you can be the one
dictating the terms,
dictating the terms of the contract. So I think that process of Julius Berger, and I think, of course, if you had more time to go into the development of Julius Berger itself, we could speak more about that. But its embeddedness with the state and closeness to the state, then creates an avenue for what you might call the legitimate accumulation of wealth and bourgeois, which of course creates a different track of the scam that has continued to exist till date. The more quote unquote progressive way of scamming the Nigerian state, which is that you also create companies and you might deliver on those contracts. You might actually deliver at the end.
And
your proximity to the state in the first place that allows you to.
And the keep on mounting is the function of the state to create a good environment so that they will come out. Enabling environment. Yeah, that's the word.
You're not up to date. They have
they are great. So
that's why Julius Berger needs to go and reinvent himself. The child.
CECC, man.
That's our own version of CECC. And I think the Julius Berger model then becomes the model for people like Alpha, Beta.
Exactly.
All these politically inclined or politically enabled business enterprises that always seem to magically be the ones who win the contract, despite the fact that you could argue that they may deliver, but then the question arises at what cost? And then finally for me, and I mean we've touched on this briefly as well, is the reputational damage or what is thought of as reputational damage that this scandal generates for Nigeria. And, it's often thought, Nigeria is seen as a kind of bastion of corruption. Or to quote David Cameron, Nigeria is seen as fantastically corrupt, right? And this year, a friend of the show who we should interview at some point. Yes, and this scandal, is one of the key moments where that reputation was cemented, no pun intended. But I mean, I think another thing that why I'm putting the kind of damage question in quotes is that reputation benefits a lot of people globally, right? People come to see, like unscrupulous business actors, banks, a range of actors in the global market come to see Nigeria as a decent place to make a quick buck.
Yeah.
And this is part of why the advance fee fraud persists, is because people actually think that you can make a quick buck
one from
the Cement Armada
without doing very much work.
Advance fee fraud. It gave birth to 419.
Exactly. But this is the globalization in a sense of 419, because people start to see that, look, you can make money at something as simple as sending a ship, if you can gather money.
Or not sending. Or
not even sending, or getting a contract. So that when, our guys, the patron saints of this show, the Yahoo boys, come around and start sending these emails.
If you get in on the action with the
then it then becomes easy to imagine the possibility.
Nigerian prince.
What is advance fee fraud? Say you be government, you be Nigerian prince, you get access to state resources, but before we go fit collect this,
just pay me like
$1 million. Why you not just send me like $20,000? Make I start to do the paperwork.
The process.
Be now, and now waiting teach them with this.
Exactly. exactly.
So that's
so
that interaction. Now that interaction between top and bottom be that.
Yeah,
sure.
What the top is doing, the bottom is going to replicate in its own way.
Exactly.
So when people going to say, like, say we just inherently they bad and all that, like, say we no see as it happen for top. You know that kind of thing.
That don't give us title for this episode. Cementing the Cement Armada.
Yes, so it's cementing the Cement Armada Scandal.
Or the Cement Armada cemented.
But anyway, so I think that for all of those reasons, this is why this particular subject of the Cement Armada scam is something that deserves much more public attention than it has received. I think for me, as somebody who studies Nigeria, I think all of us here, there's a certain amount of shock and annoyance that inspired us to pay attention to this story, because there's an extent to which, as important as it seemed to be for really a quite crucial turning point in Nigerian history, very little seems to be known about it, or it
it's
seems
almost
to
like a
be
footnote.
discussed. Yeah, exactly. It seems to be discussed so infrequently in contemporary conversations.
Still because the elites where they chop them, they still dead there now.
Yes. I mean, a lot of the main actors are still hanging around.
The main actors, you know, the article we still talk now. At them now.
Obasanjo, Gawon, etc., etc. I mean, I always wonder what it's like for Buhari, Babangida, Gawon, and Obasanjo to be in the same room. People who could
just laugh all of us.
I know IBB has very strong ties with Julius Berger.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, Julius Berger deserves it.
Who built up Milan?
At least nine give them the most contracts. I mean, nine apart from the 77 one, the pot. I mean, of course, you can. Now I see where that comes from.
But the Abuja contract was not small either, you know.
Not saying. No, I mean, they used the Tinker one, prove themselves, but I mean, IBB then really gave it to them,
adopted them,
and then I mean, for people who they do investigative journalism, it might be a good time to go and
check the trace
of how Julius Berger was formed and its military connections.
Indeed. Well, that would certainly make our lives easier when we come around to doing our Julius Berger episode. Anyway, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up.
I guess.
All right, nice one. Decent conversation.
It is decent, you know, and once again, a good one for the Scam Hall of Fame.
Indeed. Yeah. Probably number one in our inaugural Scam Hall of Fame.
Yes,
I mean, it's more tilted towards the general idea of the scam.
So, and of course, there will be future entries in the Scam Hall of Fame going forward. But I think as good a place to start in that conversation as any.
Our write-up into the introduction of this, you know, for the platforms too was captivating. So that you know, that these people don't run Nigeria game for a very long time.
And given that, you know, so everything we're discussing now will probably not go in the recording. So, but given that I didn't explain what happened in that initial intro. I think the write-up will have to clarify that, you know, the Cement Armada was this and this and this, and we just get into talking about it.
Just like intro before we start talking.
We'll do the intro. I'll do that proper intro in the write-up itself.
All right. If we pause if we stop recording now.
You can stop.
All right.
I will cut.
We can stop. I'll send you. We send the link to send it so that.